Hi there. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, wherever you are joining us from. My name is Abhijit Bhaduri. I'm the author of the book Dreamers and Unicorns, and I also work as an executive coach. This is season three of Dreamers and Unicorns. And this season is dedicated to talking about what organizations are doing about well being. And well being is not just mental well being, but it's actually on four dimensions, if you will. It's about physical well being, mental well being, it's about the connections that we make, and all of that. And this is what we are going to talk about. What are organizations doing about it? And are there things that they are doing which we can all learn from? So, without any further ado, welcome to this edition of Dreamers and Unicorns season. All right, today my guest is Venkatesh, and I'm going to introduce you to him. He is the president, group HR, and a board member for RPG Enterprises, and we will talk about what RPG is all about. But first, Venky, welcome to the show. We are so delighted that you could join us.
Thank you, Abhijit. My pleasure entirely. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
So, Venki, I want to first start with your journey. So you've got a number of awards. You've worked in different kinds of companies. In fact, last year, if I remember right, you were chosen for the Economic Times Lifetime Achievement Award. So I just wanted to sort of say that what's been your career journey like? What have been some of the inflection points? What has shaped you?
Right. I graduated from Tata Institute of Social Sciences in a completely different era, Abhijit, 1987, a long time back, which a period which I'm not sure how much of our audience can relate to, but yes, that was 34 years back. And then from campus, I joined ITC. ITC, Levers, and some of these large consumer companies were pretty much sought after. So that was a nice stint because they immediately kind of exposed you to the real world. We were posted in places like Munger in Bihar. Then I was a young HR manager for North India region and a plant called Saharanpur in UP. So it was a rough and tumble of HR that you got exposed to. So that was one stage in one's life. Great organization, phenomenal focus on learning and development. Uh, you know, they did some pioneering work, as you know, in L&OD. So I think overall great foundation and kind of helped you run an independent ship. I keep saying even today to many of my team members that even when I was a plant manager and head of a region in ITC, I used to think I was CHRO of a large business. It was a large business, but truly the company empowered you. So, and I think that's been a guiding philosophy for me through my life that, take charge, don't look upstairs. There's nobody to kind of do your job for you. Don't look sideways at some COE. So I'm that, maybe an old fashioned CHRO that you kind of control your destiny. Um, I then moved out fairly early in my life to a leadership role in a British energy firm called PowerGen PLC, where suddenly from being, a senior middle management person, I, became the head of India Middle East for this company. Relatively smaller but bigger role. So that was a learning experience. At one stage in my life, I decided to work for Indian conglomerates. It was a very conscious decision. Um,
Why?
you know,
Why was that?
I saw, in the early 2000s or actually the late 1999s, the jobs that one got in MNCs were pretty nice, but, I was seeing that, are we able to kind of shape the eventual destiny of the company sitting in India? Because if you're a subsidiary, CHRO of a large multinational in India. Everything is decided in the US or UK or wherever your headquarters is. And I kind of somehow foresaw that the next set of multinationals are going to come from India and China. And the 2000s truly proved that we had a large number of big companies getting established, and many of those companies are only 20 years old, but they're already, 10 billion, 15 billion, 20 billion. So I decided that let me work for a big Indian conglomerate where the epicenter is in India, but you still manage to work for a globally diversified organization, which is proud of its India heritage, but you get to grow as a multinational company in other geographies. Exactly the reverse of what a Unilever or a British American Tobacco or a Procter and Gamble did 100 and 150 years back. I think that was a high, and the opportunity to decide some pretty strategic issues between you and the management board and maybe the chairman was pretty tempting, rather than work in a very complex. And remember what I told you, that I was very happy to be a very independent CHRO even at a plant level. I could only work so much in a matrixed environment, so I was seeking some freedom and empowerment, which I got in these kind of companies. So my next stop was with a company called Vedanta Resources PLC, which today, as you know, is a pretty diversified global metals and mining company. I joined them when they were about 4,000 crores. In about 7 years, we became a $7 billion company, grew 100% CAGR year on year, acquired a company every year with 7,000, 10,000 people. We acquired PSUs, we acquired greenfield companies, we acquired companies in countries like Armenia, in countries like Zambia. So it was also pretty high pressure. It was a good treadmill to be on at that age. And I think it kind of exposed me to stuff which I hadn't done before, managing a board, managing a global kind of a corporation, which was fairly large in just a few years' time. I then took a call that, I want to be an entrepreneur. Now, that was tempered by one thing that I said, I'm 45. If I don't do it now, I'll never do it. And even if I do it and I'm not successful, I could always come back in 3-4 years' time when somebody would still offer me a job. And I was a little obsessed at that time with a particular model which I thought India was ready for. It was called the Director HR on Hire model. And I typically worked with companies in the 1,000 to 3,000 crore revenue base, where typically they wouldn't hire somebody like me, somebody as senior or as expensive, but they needed that strategic input. So I used to come as a layer on top of their existing HR organizations, completely non-threatening, working with the CHRO, helping him push, influence a lot of things which he or she couldn't do earlier in the organization. Very interesting experience. And I was working with multitude of companies, including private equity. And private equity was pretty nascent at that stage in India. This I'm talking about, Abhijit, in 2008, 10, 11 kind of period. And I used to work as a fund side HR advisor to some PE firms. Firstly, helping them evaluate the entrepreneurs who came to them for funding. So it was like a leadership development, talent assessment of a different kind, right? So I used to work with the GPs, the general partners of the firm, in doing that. And then once having invested, I was like a mentor, advisor, somebody who kind of helped the companies to kind of get on their feet and run their HR agenda. Very interesting. I somehow thought the earlier thing that I spoke about, the Director HR on Hire model, there were some companies which were open, but most of India was still not open. And I must admit this. Maybe it was a misjudgment on my part. I think today it's a much more...
Yeah, your idea was great, but it's just ahead of its time. That's all.
Ahead of its time. And to kind of build it up, you needed capital.
Yes.
I wasn't having that capital. And I went to look for funding. The same guys with whom I'd worked, the PE firms, they said, look, good idea, but is it scalable? The usual questions which PE firms ask you. Then I said, maybe I can do this later in my life, but right now, let me get back to a larger conglomerate. I had also detoxified myself from the large corporate experience of the previous years. I was refreshed mentally, and that's a relevant topic today, right? I mean, I was also
Of course.
at some stage mentally burnt out, wanting to try something new. I felt rejuvenated in these 4.5 years. I said I had the courage to try something before I went to my grave. And I came back. And I came back. And at that time, I chose the company very carefully. I said, listen, there's no point in putting one big chapa on yourself saying I work for a 10 billion, $15 billion company. It's about what you can do in that company. There are a lot of organizations which are large, which may be admired, but sometimes could be more feared than admired. But they don't have a very specific people agenda. So, and they don't want to sometimes, take advice. So I didn't see myself working in such companies. So I zeroed in on RPG because Harsh Goenka, the chairman, was always known to be a pretty people savvy, HR savvy kind of chairman. I've known him indirectly over the years. And when I met him, his opening line was, Venky, I may not be the biggest company in any of my sectors, but I certainly want to be the best company for people to work in. Now that resonated with me. And I said, listen, at this stage in my life, I also want to make that happen. I think, I was about 50 when I joined RPG. I said, there's no point in saying, carrying a card and saying that I work for an $8 billion company. But in reality, you're not really moving the needle within the company. So I think this company was kind of a laboratory for me, a very healthy laboratory where me and my team members and the leadership team, we got a lot of space to try a lot of interesting things. And I think it's probably unique for a diversified conglomerate like ours, where you could do so many things which are at a pan RPG level. So that's been the journey so far, and it's been a good almost 8 years in RPG. So that's where I am currently.
Fantastic. What an impressive journey. Venki, when you look at a very diversified conglomerate like what RPG is, just take me back to the time in March of 2020 when the lockdown uh, was declared.
Yeah,
What I want you to tell me is, you've got a bunch of different businesses. You've got an IT business, you've got a tires business, etc. I mean, so just tell me about the different kinds of businesses so people get an idea of
yeah,
what this is really meant to be. Um, and what what did it mean to be an employee in RPG at that point of time when the lockdown was declared? What were the employees experiencing at that stage? And what did you decide was the problem you wanted to solve?
right. Um, yeah, it's 2 years back, but it's pretty much stark and fresh in all our memories. Firstly, about our companies, Abhijit, we have companies like KEC International, which is a large EPC company, a projects organization, very much like
Sure.
L&T.
Yeah.
We have transmission, distribution, railways, civil. We are in 100 odd countries, and so that's one company which operations in across the world, including in Latin America, US, and all of that. Then we have Seat Tires, which is obvious. We have Zensar, a mid-tier IT services firm, again a global company. We have RPG Life Sciences, a pharmaceutical company which was earlier Searle of India. We have Rekim RPG, which is a joint venture with Tyco, which is now TE Connectivity. And we have a plantation company. We have rubber and tea plantations in South India called Harrison's Malayalam.
Yeah.
These 6 companies are all acquisitions, Abhijit. The interesting thing is that all our businesses are acquisitions over the years because Mr. RP Goenka, the group's founder, Harsh's dad, if you remember, had this moniker called the Takeover King of India, right? He acquired companies.
Yes. Yes.
So that's interesting, right? It's also not organically grown, mostly acquired, and yet we managed to establish a pan RPG kind of identity. March,
I want to
yeah,
pause for a second and sort of say that it's a question I'll come back to later. I just want to flag it so that we don't miss it out in the conversation. But I want to somewhere ask you that how do you manage when you integrate different companies? One of the challenges is that you find, pockets of, it's like a collage of five different places. So how did you go about um, avoiding that, or did you consciously choose to work with it? That's something I would love to know. But yeah, I'm sorry. Please continue.
We'll
So
take that
what was
later.
that day?
We'll take that later. That question
Yeah,
which you
yeah,
just.
we'll take that later. But that's something that's certainly on my mind. That, how
Okay.
do you establish a common culture?
Okay,
Yeah.
fair enough. So rewind back to March 2020, as you know, when the full blown impact, we just realized that there was a pandemic on the world, right? Till then, it was some isolated news in Wuhan and some Southeast Asian countries. So what we did is we immediately said we will first shut down all our operations and offices. We said safety is paramount. So before we got any information from anybody else, what is the market doing, what are companies doing, we said we will shut down, right? And we said we will get into work from home. And I think with all our investments in the prior years in digitizing our processes, Abhijit, we could easily transition. Okay, not just in Zensar, which anyway that's their business to do, but even the so-called brick and mortar companies like CEAT and KAC, we were fairly digitized. Way back in 2004-5, we started. Sorry, 14-15. Sorry, we started hiring chief digital officers for our companies. So the digital preparedness was quite adequate for us to transition to a remote working capacity. Then we also gave comfort. I think when you spoke about wellness, I think people get very fatigued and stressed when they hear about speculation in the market, right? So and so company is cutting 10% jobs, so and so companies holding back bonuses. Senior leadership is given up its entire salary for this year. So we also got, all this news, and it was something which we debated every week in our leadership team meetings and all of that. And we resisted the temptation to not fall into the trap of any knee-jerk reactions. I think we went and we did two things. I think sometime around July, we were due for, paying bonuses for the previous financial year. We went and did it. We had to honor promotions. We said promotions is building capability. It'll be foolish to shoot ourselves in the foot by not doing promotions. And when people come out of the pandemic, they will realize, or they will not forget that we didn't recognize them. So we did promotions. Promotions came with a financial burden, as you know. Every company has to pay people more when they get promoted. Uh, we didn't do pay rises, which we normally do in July, but we did it in January. And then, of course, in this July, we kind of really compensated by doing well. So the moment we hit our Q3, we realized that we've got to now continue investing for the future. And we've got to provide that safety and comfort for our people, which gave them the clear message, listen, we are looking after you. We had a tagline called Hello Happiness, Abhijit. Now we said we can't talk about hello happiness and do all of this, which literally takes away happiness from every part of your life. So people were quite happy. Of course, they were a little cautious initially. What's going to happen? But we stood up in every company and spoke to them and said, we are not doing anything. We are not touching your salary. Salaries will continue. Promotions will continue. We are not going to hold back anything. So we did that. We did that across all our businesses. But we had some hard stories reaching us every day, and some big companies, which honestly had greater profits than us, were doing it. Right now, we were wondering why that company A is doing it. I mean, they can manage 10 pandemics back to back. They have that kind of reserves. But anyway, that's their call. So we would joke about it, but then we would go back and say, no, listen, guys, we're not doing it. I think people really appreciated that. I've had messages coming to me. People spoke to the chairman saying, you could have done it, but you didn't do it. We will never forget this. Okay. So I think that's when good times are there, people can say anything they want. But when bad times hit, you've got to be true to your promise of looking after your people. And I think that's the one thing which, I always come back to the same thing, that whole mental fatigue that we could have caused, we didn't do. And I'm grateful to my leadership peers, the CEOs, the HR team, of course, our chairman, in kind of us holding like the Rock of Gibraltar on this, and we didn't budge.
Mhm.
So that, interestingly, we got to doing things better and better during the pandemic. There
Right.
was an article. There was an article in a newspaper which said RPG Groups continues to hire 8 CXOs, out of which 4 CEOs were hired remotely. Now, good old-fashioned HR folks like me have never hired senior leadership without meeting them, right? We ended up hiring CEOs for companies without ever meeting. That was a paradigm shift in our own mind. We hadn't met the gentleman or lady, but we went and did it. So people saw us investing in leadership talent. Headhunters were quite delighted that, unlike some of the other companies, we were not holding back and we were investing. Candidates asked us, they asked me, Venky, listen, are you guys serious about this hiring? Or are you just going through the motions? Are you going to come back and tell me the board has called off the search? We said, no, we are very clear we want to hire. The pandemic will go, and this business has a business plan which only you can fulfill. So I think those signals internally and externally went up. August 2020, phenomenal milestone I want to talk about is we implemented in the peak of the pandemic a perpetual post-pandemic remote working policy, which was unique.
Wow.
No conglomerate, no company had done it before, where we categorized people into 4 groups. There's one
Mhm.
group which, by the nature of their jobs, will have to come back. Security, facilities, people who are running a machine on a shop floor. That's pretty obvious.
Where you need to be physically present.
You need to be physically present because of the nature of your jobs, and people understand that.
Okay.
There's another category who could be now. We never did this earlier. We said you could permanently work from home, WFA, as we call it, work from anywhere. Now
Anyway.
that the revelation was not just in IT, the IT company. We also identified a lot of people in the projects company case, Seat Tires. We identified people like that. The third category is people like us, where we could work hybrid. So we announced it in 2020 August. We used a bunch of young professionals to come with this recommendation to us at Task Force. Harsh Goenka, the chairman, said, Venky, you and 2 other CEOs, you guys go through this in detail and tell us whether we should go ahead. He said, yes, absolutely. It was blessed. And when we opened up, if you remember, slightly before the second wave. Now we are planning to open up much more. We are crystal clear in our minds, Abhijit, as to how this will work. There are a lot of big companies in the US who are still debating hybrid. We have a very clear philosophy towards this. If your work is something which can be done remotely, we are not going to insist. And just because we personally like, or somebody personally likes to come to office physically, we're not going to pass the pressure to you. So it's very liberal. By the way, work from home is now available to even factory employees. That's something which has never been attempted before. So if you're not on a machine, and let's say that you're a supply chain, finance, HR
Right.
professional who's working in the factory support services, you could also avail. So we've kind of also, removed this whole little bit of an old, us versus them syndrome that may have existed, saying all these nice liberal policies are only for office staff, and we guys in factories, we still have to. We already went and implemented a 5-day week in our factories. Then the next step was to give work from home. So I think those were some of the very important steps we took during the pandemic. There are many others we did, including for COVID affected families, the deaths which happened. We also had deaths, relatively lower by God's grace, but still we had. We put in a slew of measures, relief measures for the family. I won't get into all of that, but that is obvious. I don't even want to tom-tom about it, because that's basic humanitarian thing that we had to do, and we did it. And we are so glad that we could help the families, even though our former colleagues, unfortunately, are no longer with us. So that's about what happened.
If I were to just for a minute, for some of the guests who I see have come in late, I just want to just quickly do a kind of a recap. We are talking to Venky Venkatesh, who is the big guy in HR. He's the head of HR and the board member for RPG Enterprises, and we are really talking to him about um, well-being in the workplace. And how do we build emotionally healthy workplaces? That's really the purpose of season 3 of Dreamers and Unicorns show. So one of the things that is abundantly clear from whatever Venky has talked to us about is that a number of times when you look at what the employers can do is to take away this floating anxiety which is there with people that is my job going to be impacted? Are you going to reduce salaries? Are you going to take away the bonuses? Will the promotions happen? A number of these administrative things. So for me, one of the big takeaways for me is when the employer steps in a conscious way early in the game and says, "Don't worry about this," and puts a kind of a ring of reassurance, if you will, around the employees and says, "We are not going to do this. Stop worrying about this."
Right.
They really start to feel a lot less stressed about, and these are things that can be easily avoided. So, being upfront in your communication. Number two, what I found pretty interesting, um, sometimes people say that when you have a slogan that somebody might have come up in a during a workshop, it was a clever slogan, we've used it, then that slogan comes back to bite them because it's a constraint. In your case, you've actually used the slogan of happiness to really say, how do we implement that? So
Right.
I think that's another very fascinating takeaway for me, that how do organizations and employers do just that? That how do you take that kind of a system and turn it around? So that's where we are. Back to you, Venki. Thank you. It's been fascinating.
Right. Thanks, Abhijit. And I think, as I'm reliving the story of the last 2 years, it's also kind of reinforcement to myself as to
Mm,
what we should continue doing, and not kind of, it's not a flash in the pan kind of an initiative that we started with happiness. Now we took it further, Abhijit. Sometime around October, November, we said this is the perfect time to test ourselves whether we are true to this whole happiness promise. And we had all these standard engagements that every company goes through, great places to work, and so on and so forth. We said, why not we test ourselves on happiness? Because happiness is like the ultimate nirvana in an organization, right?
sure.
I mean, it's your definition of what that is, but it is so overarching. It is. So we needed to first of all demystify it and articulate it, because it means different things to different
Right.
companies. There are soft drink producers which say, uncork a bottle of happiness, and for us, happiness was something else. So the next engagement survey, which was due in January 2021 of this year, we said it will be on happiness. So we worked on a happiness index leading to a happiness quotient, an HQ for each company, which was based on a framework we ourselves developed. We listened to 5,000 people. We did deep, inciting interviews with 300 leaders, including the chairman. They told us what happiness meant to them as an RPG. And from that, we came out with a framework. And the framework had six pillars. It also had very specific elements as to what may cause happiness if it is there, and the lack of it will cause unhappiness or whatever. Now, interestingly, I didn't realize it before I came to the show, Abhijit. Four of them were about wellness. And there is a particular section which only speaks about emotional, spiritual, financial, and physical wellness. Not so
Wow.
much about, is the company doing all of these things for you? No, that's not what we meant. Is the company culture, the environment, the empowerment, the whole engagement with managers, the opportunity to speak up and to be fearless, is that being provided to you so that you have adequate time freed up to have work-life balance? So I think we
Mm,
are we are not we are not sitting and telling everybody that you will have these following six physical wellness initiatives sponsored by the company. No, we are not doing that. But the fact that we give such a good experience at work helps them focus on these things, is what we did. Now, that happiness quotient went into each company. And this year we evaluated each of our companies on a very complex, not so much from administration, but it was very rich. And with all due respects to traditional engagement models, this was richer, higher level. It is like, going through the Gita and understanding all of life's, elements. So the happiness quotient was a very overarching, deep, for the future kind of engagement survey, and thankfully we all scored decently. Can you get 100% on happiness score? Never. It's never going to be possible because it's a moving target and people have different aspirations. And there are, of course, a lot of takeaways from each of those happiness scores in 7 different companies that we implement. Okay, but that's something we learned, and there was no benchmark in the market. We were the first company, arguably, in the world, certainly the first conglomerate anywhere in the world, to have implemented an engagement model on a happiness framework. I keep talking about it, and I genuinely think, and I had a conversation with 1 or 2 large global engagement company CEOs who were quite keen. I won't take the name. They were quite keen to actually buy it as a product and run it. But I said, listen, guys, this is not for sale. We developed it in-house so that we could constantly kind of test ourselves and kind of make sure that we are delivering happiness to our employees. So
in some way, Venky, your dream of being in a Indian company which could really use the Indian ethos, if you will, to create HR policies which are unique to this particular culture, and that can also perhaps inspire people across the world. So you had said that that was one of your reasons to work for an Indian organization. So that in some sense has come true, right?
it's come true. And Abhijit, we consider ourselves we are very proud of our heritage. But we are like any other MNC. We are present in 100 odd countries. Our policies are very, very global. We don't have a problem attracting people of any nationality. People feel comfortable slipping into our culture. I think these are the tests, whether you're a global company, not just because if you're headquartered in Rotterdam or London or whatever, right? I think it's very satisfying that we are able to create a good corporation, steeped in our values, which of course a lot of other nationalities also relate to, because it's basic human need to be happy. And I don't think there is any nationality in the world which would say, no, don't give me a happy organization. So happiness, Abhijit, I think, it sounds a little like fluff when you hear it for the first time. And a lot of companies are using this, but, trust me, we've actually put ourselves on the mat in specifying this and trying to deliver it on multiple elements that I spoke about. So this framework works for us, may not work for any other company. And I think each company has to evolve a framework which works for itself.
Sure. Venky, we are sort of coming towards the end. I wanted to take this conversation with a different kind of thing. Very quickly, if you remember, I had asked you that when you acquire companies, there is always this danger of creating like a patchwork quilt of cultures, So, and many startups, face this. Established organizations, of course, face this. That you've hired a bunch of senior leaders who in turn hire some more people who were former colleagues, and you'll end up creating these little pockets in different parts of the organization. One part of it is like this, one part is like this. When you say that, what is it that you guys have done to be able to manage this whole process? What are 2 or 3 things very quickly you can tell us?
So I think the underlying philosophy, Abhijit, is that I call it the dual citizenship model. You can be in a group company. You could come from an FMCG background, or you could come from a tire company, work in CH. So you are a CH citizen, but you're also an RPG citizen. and the twain shall always meet and shall not conflict. Okay, so that's the fundamental philosophy. Second is, I think a lot of people have come and told us, just to reinforce this philosophy, that they really felt very nice about joining us because they're not just joining a company, they're joining a larger group. And it opens up various possibilities. For example, every year we have a group conference in which we invite the leadership of all our group companies. Now, people come from so many different backgrounds. Somebody is coming from a BFSI leader is coming from New York. There is a plantation head who's coming from Kerala, but they all talk the same language. The philosophy is RPG. And what we've tried to do is we've tried to avoid the syndrome. I always joke, that any corporation, if you let it go this way, it becomes like the Indian caste system. Everybody says we are different, we are different, we are different. As you go down within a business, within a division, within a sub SBU, everybody says, you know what, we are different from this. And I've seen it in induction programs, right? Everybody wants to create a separate identity. Now we are doing the exact opposite. We are taking everybody up and saying, of course, you have unique features in each company. Yeah. You're operating in pharmaceutical, you're operating in tires.
Sure.
But at the philosophy level, at the people level, how we relate with each other, how do we deal with performance, how do we deal with a new hire, how do we integrate people, how do we deal with moments like the pandemic which hit us last year? There our response is uniform. There our response is sector agnostic, and people like that. Also, as a process, we hire leadership talent centrally from my office. So the companies are involved, but I'm involved, the chairman is involved. So when people come through that leadership process, we are already talking about KC or CET or Zensar, but we're also talking about RPG. And people have told me, Venky, I think, it's good because there is also this whole safety that we feel that there is another layer on top. There's another sky which is there beyond the current sky. It's also governance, good governance, right? If somebody in one of our companies wants to talk to somebody neutral, not necessarily his CEO or his line manager, they can pick up the phone and speak to me or any of my colleagues in group work. And I think people love that. They feel that's one of the hallmarks of being in a larger conglomerate. And
Right.
80-90% of our people policies are common. We never believe that you need to have, if you have a talent process, why should it be different for pharmaceuticals or IT or tires? People are people across the organization. So I think this is a constant reinforcement. Our first attempt is to make anything pan RPG.
Sure.
I have an HR council of all my CHROs, and we are always talking about what can we do uniformly across the group. And if obviously something is so industry specific, we will do that. That's a no-brainer. We'll have to do that. So I think we are probably one of the few conglomerates who thinks like this. And there is a merit and power in it because we've created a huge pool of fungible resources who can move across. We have centers of excellence. For example, I'll tell you an interesting thing. We have a COE R&D where there is a CTO of Zensar, IT services. We have a tire technology R&D head. We have KC's chief technology officer who's into engineering design. All these guys talk and they have common things to speak about and exchange best practices. Legal, HR, finance, obviously, Abhijit, that's pretty much obvious.
I've met your team. Yes, of course.
But even the functions which can appear disparate, supply chain, manufacturing, sales, we have COEs which speak across the different businesses.
Which actually becomes, in my mind, when you have a structure like that, it enables a lot of innovation because the idea of innovation is you meet people who are different from you. So having that COE actually makes that kind of stuff happen. So I think it's a really clever way to do it. Besides, you did talk about dual citizenship. I like that framework, which is that you have an RPG citizenship and you are part of whatever company you're getting hired for. So in that sense, you are keeping this duality. It's something that enables you more freedom rather than conflict. And
Absolutely.
it also sort of seems that when you move people around, it creates more possibilities. But I also picked up one piece which you kind of really mentioned in passing, that even during the interview, you make it abundantly clear that it's a dual citizenship model. So,
Yeah.
people come in with that mindset. So I think there are a couple of great ideas. One last question, Venki. When you think about well being, what are two or three tips that you personally use and implement? What are the things that I can learn from you?
Well, Abhijit, I just want to talk about just 10 seconds for the benefit of the audience, something we did in RPG. I don't want to miss that. We started a huge mental wellness uh, kind of a campaign as soon as the pandemic struck because we were hearing stories about how this is affecting people. So we tied up with a mental wellness company for our employees and their families. So people found it very useful. We appointed a chief fitness officer. We call it the new CFO for the group. And this chief fitness officer was working with people. It's like one big, gigantic trainer for the whole organization. It's like a
Very
personal
nice.
trainer paid by the company. So we used to put it out as, here comes the new CFO, the chief fitness officer. So that was also another interesting initiative which we learned. One of our group companies started it, and then it went viral across the organization. Uh, Listen, as far as I'm concerned, I don't do anything which is kind of out of the way. I've been running for the last 10 years, and I'm not a big marathon runner, but I run for fitness, and I think that's something which I love. And I think as I'm getting older, I'm also conscious that I need to take care of muscle mass and strength training. So I do go visit the gym. So gymming and I think some bit of running is the combo that I like. Uh, I would have loved to uh, kind of do some kind of a special diet, but I'm pretty much and I find that tough. I love eating, so and I keep reassuring myself that as long as I don't miss my workout, I can eat sensibly at least, if not overdo it. Uh, I think I'm also a listen. I think everybody is a spiritual person at one level, but I've got this very uh, one side of me which is coexisting with my other part, where I draw a
Hmm.
lot of relief and solace, from it. And I'm a big temple visitor. You know,
Hmm.
that gives me a lot of solace. I have traveled across the country to various um spiritual shrines, including up in the mountains like Badrinath, all of that. So I enjoy that. Truly, I enjoy that. Um, I like writing on things which are different than management. I'm writing a book, a mythological thriller which is set in the future. So hope to publish it
Ah.
soon. I'll probably take a few tips from you. You are a veteran book writer, author, and publisher. But I'll pick your brains on how to do it.
No, this is, I mean, really fascinating that you've got stuff around mythology set in the future. That's a
Yes,
really
yes.
nice, interesting thing already.
It's interesting.
Great. Uh, I, would love to talk more about all this, but this is all that we have time for today.
Sure.
Venki, thank you so very much. And I so appreciate, for me, some of the things that you talked about, which I took away. One, I think I like the way that you've reassured the employees. That's one of the elements of well-being, that in whichever way you can remove the stress element of and uncertainty around you, either for yourself or for your colleagues or people at home. Removing uncertainty is one of the great ways of well-being, which you talked about. Also, having your anchor in not just the physical workouts, etc., but also a spiritual anchor, a financial anchor, which sort of reassures you that things are there. So these are all, anything which sort of generates stress is something that can be addressed through a particular process. I like that idea of the new CFO as your chief fitness officer, which I think is such a brilliant one. I'm going to sort of tell other people to follow that too. And above all, I think that just this whole thing of organizations looking at things beyond engagement, which I think has a very transactional kind of a tone to it, really looking at taking it to a higher level and focusing on happiness was something that I really enjoyed hearing from you. Thank you so much once again, and all the very best, to your dreams and ideas. And I'm sure that we will get a chance to talk about some more of your stuff. There were some questions around diversity, inclusion, etc. We'll take up another time. Thank you so much once again for being with us.
Thank you very much, Abhijit. And I think, wonderful the way you kind of triggered the thought process in my mind. I mean, it was a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much for the opportunity. I really enjoyed this session.